While the idea of climate change and global warming has been brought up so many times, very often we don't understand what exactly is climate change and how exactly climate change works. At the roots of climate change and global warming is the idea of greenhouse gases and greenhouse gas emissions. But what are these greenhouse gases? Greenhouse gases are a group of gases that include carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor, among others. These gases trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, very similar to the way a greenhouse traps heat. When sunlight enters the Earth's atmosphere, some of it is absorbed by the Earth's surface, which then radiates heat back into the atmosphere. These greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide and methane, trap some of this heat, preventing it from escaping back into space. This process is known as the greenhouse effect and is essential for maintaining the Earth's temperature within a range that is suitable for life. However, many human activities, such as burning fossil fuels, deforestation, and industrial processes, have led to an increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This increase has resulted in more heat being trapped, leading to an increase in global temperatures, which has become known as global warming. Greenhouse gases from global carbon emissions have significantly increased since 1900. Since 1970, carbon dioxide emissions have increased by about 90%, and between 2000 and 2010, emissions have soared 32%, totaling almost 35 billion metric tons. As a result, Earth's temperature has risen by an average of 0.1 degrees Fahrenheit per decade since 1880, or about 2 degrees Fahrenheit in total. While this may not seem like a lot, the effects of climate change are very serious.
Every region in the United States is already experiencing the costly effects of climate change. Areas including coastal areas threatened by rising sea levels and more intense hurricanes, Midwest farmlands facing more crop-damaging heat waves, pests and flooding, and communities in the West and Southwest experiencing drought and wildfires. The current cost going into climate change of the president's budget per year of $44.9 billion to tackle the climate crisis, an increase of nearly 60% since 2021. The UN said that developing countries alone need a combined $1 trillion a year in external funding to meet the goals of climate change. If global warming continues unabated, extreme heat waves that now occur once every 20 years are projected to occur about every other year by the end of the century. Urban areas such as Philadelphia, Chicago, and Indianapolis will likely experience the worst of these effects. Addressing global warming could help lessen the harm to ecosystems that now provide us with multiple benefits. For example, rising seas threaten coastal barrier reefs, which protect communities from the storm surges, and wetlands, which filter impurities from water. Drought and pests threaten forests, which provide lumber, and warming temperatures and growing acidification threaten oceans, lakes, rivers, which sustain our fisheries. Many animals and plant species that provide us with important medicines and other products could face extinction. If global temperatures rise more than 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, up to 30% of plant and animal species could become extinct. It has been concluded with high confidence that by mid-century, precipitation changes owing to climate change will mean that less water will be available in already arid parts of the world, including the western United States. Climate change is contributing to snowpack losses and melting glaciers in the United States, leading to water shortages in the West. Addressing global warming could lessen the threat of water resources. Water shortages have wide-ranging consequences. For example, as sources of water used for irrigation dry up, the cost of producing food could rise. Lower water levels and higher temperatures in streams and rivers could diminish the capacity of hydropower and cause the collapse of some fisheries. Water prices could rise not only for farmers but also for industry and homeowners, especially in areas where growing populations are already putting stress on water resources, such as the Southwest United States. Finally, because the concentration of pollutants increases when water levels drop, water shortfalls could also lower water quality.
Looking at the largest producers of greenhouse gases, one sticks out: cows. Cows are the #1 agricultural source of greenhouse gases worldwide. Each year, a cow will belch about 220 pounds of methane, which is 28 more times more potent than carbon dioxide. This adds up. And each year, cows release over 231 million pounds of methane into the atmosphere each year, or about 14% of human-induced climate change emissions. This may not seem like a big number, but to put this into perspective, this 231 million pounds is more than most every single country in Africa. And if cows were their own country, they'd be the 5th largest producer of methane. You may be wondering how these cows are responsible for such a big part of climate change. Cows are ruminant animals, which means they have a specialized stomach with 4 different compartments that allow them to efficiently break down their food. The first and largest compartment is the rumen, which acts as a fermentation valve where food, such as grass and hay, is broken down by billions of microorganisms, including bacteria, protozoa, and fungi. These microorganisms ferment the food, breaking down into simpler compounds. The fermentation process in the rumen is anaerobic, means it occurs in the absence of oxygen. During this process, microorganisms, such as methanogens, produce enzymes that break down complex carbohydrates into simple compounds, which release hydrogen gas as a byproduct. The hydrogen gas then reacts with carbon dioxide found in the rumen to produce methane, and this methane gas is eventually released from the cow's stomach through birth. The amount of methane produced by cows is influenced by various factors, such as their diet. For example, diets that are rich in fibrous plant materials, such as grass and hay, tend to produce more methane, as those materials are harder to break down. Therefore, there has been research on how we can change a cow's diet to reduce the amount of methane production.
So what have we done so far? Our research has found that the addition of seaweed to a dairy cow's diet does change the composition of the rumen microbiome. This means that the populations of bacteria and archaea species that live in the rumen change when seaweed was provided as part of the cow's diet. While the overarching reason for conducting this study is the significant amount of methane produced by the dairy and beef industries, this study did not measure specific levels of methane emission. Rather, we focused on changes to the makeup of the microbiome, which is important to understand in depth in order to solve the issue of significant methane emissions. Also, by studying the relative changes to the populations of methanogens, the group of archaea responsible for producing methane in the cow, we can gain an understanding of how these organisms respond to seaweed. After performing several different surveys of the microbiome through stereomicroscopy, other imaging techniques, and culturing microbes on plates to identify different microbes in the rumen and feces of cows, we found that the rumen microbiome is extremely diverse. A large variety of protists, bacteria, archaea, and fungi were found through these methods to demonstrate the number and variety of species present. To further examine the diversity of the microbiome, we then isolated the DNA of a specific gene found in bacteria and archaea and sequenced these sections of DNA. Once we had these DNA sequences, we cross-referenced them with databases of known species and their unique sequences, which allowed us to identify the species present in our samples. We found close to 50 different families of bacteria and archaea in the rumen and fecal microbiome, which further showed us the diversity of this ecosystem.
Why does this research matter? Despite the minuscule sizes of the organisms in these experiments, they can have big impacts, and knowing who they are and what they do is critical to understanding the next steps to take. These discoveries have allowed us to categorize and identify the microbial communities of thousands of organisms that influence methane production, and have opened the doors for further studies into what contributes to methane emissions and whether or not it can be controlled. In addition to ours, other studies, such as ones by Noel et al. In 2019 and Andrade et al. In 2020, have looked into the connection between the rumen and fecal microbiomes and how they influence each other. Research has also been conducted by Kinley et al. In 2016 and others to discover whether or not certain species of seaweed are more effective at reducing methane emissions than others. Moving forward, we can use these results to further scientific research into this project and, in time, work to mitigate the effect of cattle-produced methane on the environment. This could, with other global initiatives, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help to reduce or even resolve climate change.
The addition of seaweed into a livestock's diet has no effects on the quality of meat. There are also no modifications or injections made. Simply an addition of a natural additive into the diets which currently consist of grain and hay. With seaweed being added into the diet of livestock, there would be an enormous increase in jobs at seaweed fisheries. Fisheries would produce seaweed needed to be harvested and delivered to farms. The increase in seaweed farming in the United States would also allow for less foreign imports and allow more jobs and businesses to flourish locally.
In order to continue research into solving this problem, funding is needed to support the people, processes, and organisms involved with this project. Please consider donating today and help us save our ecosystems, our families, and the world.